there! We are back with the friendly book, How to Eat Fried Worms. This is chapter 2, Digging. No, said Tom, that's not fair. He and Alan and Joe were wandering around behind the barns at Billy's house, arguing over where to dig the first worm. What do you mean it's not fair? Said Joe. Nobody said anything about where the worms were supposed to come from. We can get them anywhere we want. But not from a manure pile, said Tom. That's not even fair. Even if we did make a rule about something, you still have to be fair. What difference does it make where the worm comes from, said Alan. A worm's a worm's a worm. Well, there's nothing wrong with manure, said Joe. It comes from cows just like milk. Joe was so sly. He was a devious person and a schemer. The manure pile had been his idea. You and Billy have got to be fair too, said Alan and Tom. Besides, we're going to dig in the old part of the pile where it doesn't smell much anymore. Come on, said Tom, coming off across the field, dragging his shovel. If it's fair, you wouldn't be so anxious about it. Would you eat a worm from a manure pile? Joe and Alan ran to catch up. I wouldn't eat a worm, period, said Joe. So you can't go by that. But if your mother told you to go out and pick some fresh daisies from the supper table, would you go pick daisies off of a manure pile? My mother wouldn't ask me. She would ask my sisters. You know what I mean. Alan and Tom and Joe leaned on their shovels underneath a tree in the apple orchard, watching the worms they had dug squirming on a flat rock. Not him, said Tom, pointing to a nightcrawler. Why not? Would you look at him? That worm's so big, he could choke a dog. Ugh! Jeez, exploded Alan. You expect us to pick one Billy can just gulp down like an ant or a small little nit? Gulping is not eating, said Joe. The worm's got to be big enough so Billy has to cut it into bites and eat it with a fork off of a plate. Is this one or nothing? Said Alan, picking up the nightcrawler. Tom considered the matter. It would be more fun watching Billy trying to eat the nightcrawler. Boy, that thing was huge. A regular python. A python is a really, really big, huge snake. Wait until Billy saw it. We let you choose where to dig, said Alan. After all, thought Tom, Billy couldn't expect to win $50 just by gulping down a few measly baby little worms. All right, come on. He turned and started back towards the barns, dragging his shovel. Chapter 3, Training Camp. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10! Billy was doing push-ups in the deserted horse barn. He wasn't worried about eating the first worm, but people were always daring him to do things, and he'd found it was better to look ahead than to try to figure things out and get himself ready. So last winter, Alan dared him to sleep out all night in the igloo they built in Tom's backyard. Why not? Billy had thought to himself. I mean, for real, what could happen? About midnight, he was huddled and shivering under his blankets in the dark, and he began to wonder if he should just give up and go home. His feet felt like they were aching stones inside of his boots, and his tongue inside his mouth was even cold. But a half hour later, as he was dancing outside in the moonlight to warm himself, Tom's dog Martha had come along with 6 other dogs, all in a pack, and Billy had said, "Come here, little doggies," and they went into the igloo and blocked the door with an orange crate. After all the dogs had stopped wrestling and nipping and barking and sniffing around, they all went to sleep in a heap with Billy in the middle, as warm as an onion in a pot of stew. But he hadn't been able to think of anything special to do to prepare himself for eating a worm. So he was just limbering up in general, push-ups, knee bends, jumping jacks. By this point, he was red-faced and sweating. Nearby, and on an orange crate, he'd set out bottles of ketchup, Worcestershire sauce, jars of piccalilli and mustard, and a box of crackers, salt and pepper shakers, a lemon, a slice of cheese, his mother's tin full of cinnamon and sugar, a box of Kleenex, a bar of maraschino cherries, some horseradish, and a plastic honey bear. Tom's head appeared around the door. Are you ready? Billy scrambled up, brushing his hair back. Yeah, I think so. Ta-ra! Tom flung the door open and Alan marched in carrying a covered silver platter in both hands. Joe slouched along beside him with a napkin over one arm, nodding and smiling. Tom dragged another orange crate over beside the first one, and Alan set the silver platter on top of it. A chair, cried Alan. A chair for the monsieur. Come on, said Billy. Cut the clowning. Tom found an old milking stool in one of the horse stalls, and Joe dusted it off with his napkin, showing his teeth, and then ushering Billy onto it. Ladies and gentlemen, shouted Alan, I present my masterpiece, Worm à la mode. He swept the cover off the platter. Oh, cried Billy, recoiling. I would too. Chapter 4. The huge night crawler sprawled limply in the center of the platter, brown and steaming. Boiled, said Tom. We boiled it. Billy stormed about the barn, kicking barrels and posts, arguing, a night crawler is not a worm. If it was a worm, it would be called a worm. A night crawler's a night crawler. Finally, Joe ran off to get his father's dictionary. Nightcrawler. Noun. Earthworm, especially a large earthworm found on the soil surface at night. Billy kicked a barrel. It just wasn't there. He didn't care what any dictionary said. Everybody knew the difference between a nightcrawler and a worm. Look at the thing. Ugh! It's as big as a souvenir pencil from the Empire State Building. Ugh! He poked at it with his finger. Alan said they'd agreed right at the start that he and Joe could choose the worms. If Billy was going to cheat, the bet was off. So he got up and started for the door. He guessed he had other things to do besides argue all day with a Fink. So Tom took Billy aside into the horse stall and put his arm around his shoulder and talked to him about George Cunningham's brother's mini bike and how they could ride it on the trail under the power lines behind Odell's farm, up and down the hills, over the rocks, la-di-da-di-da. Sure, it was a big worm, but it'd only be a couple more bites. Did he want to lose a mini bike over 2 bites? Slop enough mustard and ketchup and horseradish on it, and he wouldn't even taste the worm. Yeah, said Billy. I can probably eat this one, but I gotta eat 15 worms. You can't quit now, said Tom. Look at them. He nodded at Alan and Joe, waiting besides the orange crates. They're gonna tell everybody you're a chicken, and it's gonna get all over school. Come on. He led Billy back to the orange crates, sat him down, tied the napkin around his neck. Alan flourished the knife and the fork. Would Monsieur like it carved lengthwise or crosswise? Ketchup? Asked Joe, showing his teeth. Ketchup? Cut it out, said Tom. Here. He glopped on the ketchup and the mustard and the horseradish on the nightcrawler, squeezed a few drops of lemon juice, and salted and peppered it. Billy closed his eyes and opened his mouth. You would in? Tom sliced off the end of the nightcrawler and forked it up, but just as he was about to poke it into Billy's open mouth, Billy closed his mouth and opened his eyes. No, I need to do this myself. Tom handed him the fork. Billy gazed at the dripping ketchup and mustard, thinking, ugh, it's all right talking about eating worms, but doing it is a whole nother thing. Tom whispered in his ear, mini bike. Billy poked the fork into his mouth and he chewed ferociously and he gulped and he gulped and he gulped again, and his eyes began to cross and they were swimming, and then he clenched them shut. He flapped his arms wildly, and then, opening his eyes, he grinned up at Tom. Superb, Gaston. Tom cut another piece. Ketchup, mustard, salted, peppered, horseradish, and lemoned it. Handed that fork to Billy, and Billy slugged it down, smacking his lips the whole way. And so they proceeded, now sprinkling on cinnamon and sugar, or maybe even a bit of cheese, some cracker crumbs or Worcestershire sauce, until there was nothing on the plate but a few stray dabs of ketchup and mustard. "Well," said Billy, standing up and wiping his mouth with his napkin. "So they are done mit die first course. Now seconds? Let me look into your mouth," said Alan. "Yeah," said Joe. "Let's make sure he actually swallowed it." Certainly, said Billy. "Look as long as you want." Alan and Joe scrutinized the inside of his mouth. Okay, said Tom. "Leave him alone now. Come on, 1 down, 14 to go." "How did it taste?" asked Alan. Good, said Billy. Very fine, very fine." Hoo. He flapped his arms like a big bird and began to hop around the barn, crying, Good, very fine, good. Alan and Joe and Tom looked so worried. Yeah, good. How you feeling, Billy?" asked Tom. "Yeah, stop flapping around and come tell us how you're feeling," said Joe. I have to show you these pictures. Can you imagine? Silly. They huddled together by the orange crates as Billy hopped around and around them, flapping his arms. Good, very fine. Hoo. Alan whispered, "He's crackers." Joe edged towards the door. "Don't let him see we're afraid. Crazy people are like dogs. If they see you're afraid, they're going to attack." "It couldn't be," whispered Tom, standing his ground. "One worm?" Good, screeched Billy, hopping higher and higher and drooling from his mouth. "Hey, Billy!" burst out Tom suddenly in a hearty, quakery voice. "Cut it out, will you? I want to ask you something." Billy's arms flapped slower. He tiptoed around Tom, his head cocked to one side and his cheeks all puffed out. Tom hugged himself, chuckling nervously. Hey, cut it out, will you, Billy? Hey. Billy pounced. Joe and Alan fled. The barn door banged behind them. Billy rolled on the floor, helplessly with laughter. Tom finally got up, brushed himself off. "Did you see their faces?" asked Billy, laughing and climbing over each other out the door. "Oh, geez. Joe was pale as an onion." "Yeah," said Tom. Ha. Yeah, you really fooled them." "Oh, geez." Billy sat up and he crawled over to the door and peered out the knothole. "Look at them, peeking up over the stone wall. Watch this." The door swung slowly open, screeching. Billy hopped onto the door sill, into the yard, up onto a stump, splashed into a puddle, flapping his arms and rolling his head. Alan and Joe galloped up the hill through the high grass, yelling, "Here he comes! Get out of the way!" And then Billy stopped hopping and climbing up on the stump, called in a shrill, girlish voice, "Oh, boys, where are you going? I'd something fair to show to ittle boys." Alan and Joe stopped and looked back. I do going home, ittle boys," yelled Billy. "I'd Ted." "Who's scared?" "Yeah, Joe," yelled Joe. "I guess I can go home without being called scared if I want to." "But ain't oo in a dareful hurry," shouted Billy. "I just remembered I was supposed to help my mom wash the windows this afternoon," said Alan. "That's all." He turned and started up through the meadow, his hands in his pocket. "Yeah, me too," said Joe, and he followed after Alan. That is the end of chapter 4.